Hello, my name is Nora Whitman, and for most of my life, birthdays meant silence, no calls, no warmth, just the echo of family distance. But this year, my sister sent me a gift, a beautiful bottle of whiskey. The problem she knew I quit drinking years ago because of my heart. What seemed like kindness carried a shadow, and when I handed that bottle to her husband, everything began to unravel. Birthdays used to mean nothing but silence for me, until the morning I unsealed a box that looked harmless and realized the real gift was the silence behind it. The November air was sharp after my run. Fallen leaves dotted the porch of my small Missouri home, every edge in its place, just like the rest of my life. On the step waited a plain cardboard box sealed with neat tape, a card stuck on top. Just two words: Happy Birthday. No name, no warmth, only Sylvia's handwriting. I couldn't help remembering our father's funeral years ago when she leaned in close and whispered, "One day, you'll regret taking what's mine." That memory made the gift feel less like a gesture and more like a message. Inside lay a heavy green bottle of whiskey, wax-sealed gold lettering, limited edition, expensive. But Sylvia knew I had stopped drinking years ago after the cardiologist warned me about my heart. She had been in that hospital room. There was no way she forgot. I stood staring at the bottle, weighing it like a riddle. I had inherited Dad's old truck after the estate settled. Sylvia got the house she still struggled to maintain. That split had always left ash between us. The whiskey now felt like another spark dropped onto that heap. I wasn't about to let it gather dust. Robert, her husband of 20 years, actually enjoyed whiskey. A construction foreman, steady and decent, he was one of the few in the family who never sharpened words against me. If anyone deserved the gift, it was him. By afternoon, I was at their house. Robert greeted me in the garage, his hands still rough from tools. "Happy birthday, Major," he said with a grin. I held out the bottle. "This came from Sylvia. I figured you'd appreciate it more than I would." His face lit up as if I had delivered treasure. He turned the label, whistling softly. "Damn, this is the good stuff." Inside the kitchen, Sylvia leaned against the counter, arms folded. Her eyes flicked from the bottle to me, then narrowed. "You gave it to him?" Her voice was flat. "I don't drink. You know that." Her jaw tightened, the faintest tremor in her hand as Robert fetched glasses. "That was for you." "Then why send whiskey?" I asked, keeping my tone level. She didn't answer. She just watched as Robert poured a glass, the amber catching in the light. He lifted it in a small toast to me. "To birthdays and sisters who share." He took a long sip, savoring it. "Smooth," he murmured with satisfaction. Sylvia's gaze never left me. Her lips parted just enough to let out two low words, as if she were giving permission no one had asked for. "Enjoy it." Robert smiled, oblivious. I forced a nod, but my skin prickled. Her stare felt heavier than the bottle had in my hands. As Robert savored the smooth burn, I caught the look in Sylvia's eyes. That bottle had never been meant for him. 3 nights later, the phone rang at midnight. My sister's voice didn't tremble. She said Robert had collapsed. The words jolted me upright in bed. For a moment, I just listened to the hum of the line, the quiet between her sentences heavier than the news itself. My mind flashed back to the cardiologist years ago warning me, one sip could stop your heart. I remembered Robert lifting his glass, Sylvia's eyes fixed on me instead of him. By the time I reached St. Mary's Hospital, the world outside was frozen in silence. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the ER smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Robert lay pale beneath a thin sheet machines, pulsing in rhythm with his fragile heartbeat. Sweat clung to his temples, his lips cracked and dry. Sylvia stood in the corner, her arms folded, her expression almost bored. When I asked what had happened, she said flatly, "He collapsed at dinner. They think it was something he ate. Or maybe the whiskey you brought." The accusation stung not because it surprised me, but because she wanted it to. Her words fell like a blade in the room. The attending physician glanced at me. Recent food medications, alcohol, I answered steady. He had roast chicken, vegetables, and a glass of whiskey. I didn't drink. I gave it to him. Sylvia's silence after that was more cutting than her words. Her jaw stayed clenched, her eyes cold. The doctor ordered blood panels. We're suspecting plant toxins, something ingested. The phrase carried a weight that locked the air in my lungs. Poison. Not accident. Not chance. I left Robert's bedside only long enough to call Alan Pierce, an old Army medic who now ran a toxicology lab in Kansas City. My voice felt steadier than I expected as I explained the situation. If your gut says it's wrong, Alan told me, it probably is. Bring me whatever you have. That's when I remembered on instinct days earlier I had poured a finger of whiskey into a mason jar in my fridge. Insurance. Proof. My military habits had saved something I didn't know I'd need. By the time I drove back to my house, I opened the fridge, and there it was, the jar, amber liquid still half full. But when I turned toward the trash can, something stopped me. The bag was tied differently than I had left it. Inside, beneath coffee grounds, lay a small, unmarked vial, white powder clinging to the rim. My blood ran cold. Someone had been here. Quiet, deliberate. Not a break-in. No forced locks, no shattered glass. A key, maybe. Or practice. I sealed the jar and vial in plastic bags, slid them into a cooler, and drove through the dead of night toward Kansas City. Every stoplight felt like a trap, waiting to spring. Alan met me outside his lab coat thrown over Jean's face grave. He took the evidence without questions, only a promise. I'll run it now. I waited in my truck, staring at the dashboard clock crawl past 2:03, then 4 a.m. The night outside was silent, but my chest thudded like I was back on patrol overseas, waiting for an unseen strike. When Alan finally stepped out, his expression told me before his words did. It's there. White snakeroot. Lethal dose. Not a trace from food, not contamination. This was intentional. The name hit me like a rifle shot. White snakeroot, an old poison notorious in Missouri history for killing by heart failure. My breath caught. Robert wasn't the intended casualty. Alan lowered his voice. Charlotte, this wasn't random. Somebody wanted to deliver a message. I drove home as dawn broke pale over empty fields. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles cracked. The whiskey wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And it had been addressed to me. By sunrise, I wasn't just a sister. I was an officer again, logging evidence, not feelings. The house was still every clock tick amplified. I cleared the dining table and turned it into a command post notebook's laptop, the lab report from Alan. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote, Field Report 001, Potential Poisoning, White Snakeroot. My old instructor's words rang clear. What you know is nothing. What you can prove is everything. I ruled 3 columns: date, evidence, status. Nov 27, whiskey gift card in Sylvia's hand. Status, photo bagged. Nov 30, Robert collapse, ICU. Status, pending medical report. Nov 30, mason jar sample. Status, secured, transferred to lab. Deck 1, vial with white residue found in my trash. Status, bagged. Deck 1, Allen's tox report, deliberate infusion of snakeroot dosage capable of cardiac arrest. Status, confirmed. I slid the report into a sleeve and placed it inside a fireproof lockbox with labeled bags and photos. Key on a lanyard tucked under my shirt. I whispered to myself, this isn't paranoia. This is protocol. By mid-morning, Alan called, his voice brisk. No contamination. Extraction markers are deliberate. Someone prepared it knowingly. His certainty hardened my notes into evidence. I walked the house, setting quiet tripwires, thin sewing thread across the back door and hallway. If anyone entered, I would know. Not long after my phone buzzed. Leah. Her voice was hushed. Aunt Nora, can I come over just for a minute? I told her to use the alley. She arrived, pale, hood drawn. Her eyes widened at the table covered in files. You're treating this like a mission, she whispered. It is one. She folded her arms, bracing herself. I saw Mom drying plants in the shed. She had leaves pressed into a notebook, Latin names. One was Ageratina altissima. I looked it up. White snakeroot. I logged her words verbatim. Why tell me? Her eyes dropped to the ledger. Because Dad asked for you when he woke up. Not her. She blinked quickly. Please don't tell her I came. I won't, I promised. Promises are evidence too. When she left, I wrote Deck 2. Leah report plants observed in shed identification matches toxic agent. Status unverified, needs inspection. Twilight came, early shadows turning the windows into mirrors. Taking out the trash, I noticed broken brown glass buried under filters dusted with white residue. A bitter smell rose when I leaned close. Someone had disposed of trial fragments in my bin. No forced entry. Whoever came had keys or practice. I bagged the shards, labeled them, added to the ledger. Back inside the house hummed with small noises, pipes, refrigerator, a passing car. I checked the tripwire at the back door, intact. Relief eased my chest for a moment. Then I crouched at the hallway thread. It sagged in a soft arc, snapped clean. My stomach dropped. I scanned the bedroom. Nothing overt disturbed, but my jewelry dish sat an inch off its mark, a difference only habit would catch. Evidence of presence without theft, a message. I phoned Alan. Second intrusion. No lock damage. Tripwire broken. Broken glass and trash. Logging everything. You need police backup, he urged. It's already escalating, I said, and hung up. I touched the house back into order, chairs, square blinds, level, shoes against the wall, small acts of control against the chaos pressing in. Then I duplicated my files to a second flash drive, bagged it with Alan's report, and placed both in the lockbox. I paused, hearing again the voice drilled into me years ago. What you know is nothing. What you can prove is everything. I closed the lockbox with shaking hands. If Sylvia was already inside my house, then the war had begun. Wars don't always start with bullets. They start when someone tells you to shut up. The phrase curled in my head as I walked the sterile hallway of St. Mary's. January frost blurred the windows, the same kind of frost that lingered between me and Sylvia for decades. Robert stirred in his hospital bed when I stepped in, his face pale against the sheets. His lips cracked open, barely audible. Don't. Trust her. His hand twitched in mine, then fell limp again as the machines resumed their steady rhythm. I knew exactly who he meant. I remembered Sylvia's words at the inheritance settlement years ago, the bitter edge when she spat, "You stole from me once. You'll pay for it." At the time, I thought it was just grief talking. Now I knew it was prophecy. That evening, Leah asked me to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where the hiss of espresso machines could drown out secrets. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands trembling as she passed me a folded sheet. I copied this from Mom's notebook. Dosages. Measurements. She even wrote her initials SK. The paper smelled faintly of graphite. I unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning numbers precise enough to make my blood chill. You realize how dangerous this is for you? I asked. Leah's jaw set. Dad doesn't deserve this. Neither do you. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Sylvia's name lit the screen. Against instinct, I picked up. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. You've made yourself part of the problem, Nora. Blood means silence. You broke that rule. Blood also means responsibility, I shot back. She laughed once, brittle. Families survive when people let things go. Think about that. The line went dead. The next morning, I carried Leah's sheet, Alan's report, and my growing ledger into the police precinct. Detective Daniel Ross looked every inch, the veteran, creased suit, skeptical eyes that scanned more than listened. I laid the evidence on his desk. You're asking me to believe your sister's poisoning her own husband, he said. I'm not asking you to believe, I replied. I'm asking you to look. He paged through the lab report, then tapped Leah's copy. If we get the original signed, it's a different story. Right now, this is hearsay. Leah and I drove straight to Sylvia's property. The shed crouched behind the house, its padlock old but loose from years of weather. We slipped inside, flashlights cutting through dust. Shelves lined with jars of brittle stems and powders stretched along the wall. The air was earthy, bitter. Leah knelt at the far corner, tugging at a crate stacked with photo albums. Beneath it, a tin box waited like it had been planted there for us. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a notebook bound in leather pages pressed flat with careful handwriting. I flipped through. Dosages, plant sketches, extraction notes, all annotated with initials SK. On the last page, a signature, full and deliberate, Sylvia Kent. The door creaked behind us and I froze, heart hammering. But it was Ross, his badge glinting in the dim light. He'd followed our tip. His face was hard, unreadable as he took the notebook from me. He slid it into an evidence bag with the slow precision of someone weighing consequences. "This," he said, sealing it shut, "changes everything." My phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification. I pressed play, and Sylvia's voice filled my ear, low and venomous. "Families survive when people let things go." But I wasn't letting go. Courtrooms don't smell like justice, they smell like old varnish and nerves. But on the day my sister faced the jury, every breath felt like a verdict waiting to drop. Reporters clogged the hall, notebooks raised like shields. Inside, Gerald Knox rose first, spinning a picture of me as a jealous soldier inventing a poisoning story to steal inheritance. Sibling rivalry, misunderstood herbs, paranoid suspicions, he said, smiling as if the words themselves were armor. When my turn came, I spoke plainly. A box, a birthday card, a bottle I couldn't drink, so I gave it to Robert. I explained the mason jar, the lab reports, my ledger of dates and evidence. Knox tried to cut in, but the judge's gavel silenced him. Robert followed, frail but steady. He raised his eyes to the jury and said, "She gave it to me only because she couldn't drink it. That was all, but truth doesn't need flourish." Then Leah walked forward, her shoulders tight with resolve. She described the shed, the plants, the Latin names penciled in her mother's hand, and the page she copied with dosages marked SK. Knox tried to dismiss her as a confused child searching for loyalty. She didn't blink. "I'm searching for the truth," she said. Detective Ross stacked the evidence brick by brick, whiskey samples, jars of dried plants, the notebook itself. On the last page, Sylvia's signature stretched across the line, no initials, no disguise. Knox tried to wave it off as hobby notes, but the science was ironclad. I remembered the way Sylvia had looked at me when Robert first sipped that whiskey, the weight of intent behind her eyes. That glass was never meant for him. Knox launched his final sweep, calling me a decorated officer seeing patterns where none existed. He gestured toward Sylvia, hoping for composure. Instead, her mask slipped. She should have been the one in that hospital bed, not him. The words cracked across the wood like a gunshot. The gallery froze. Knox's strategy collapsed in the silence. The judge rapped once, then leaned forward. Intent has a way of finding its light. Hours later, when the jury returned, the verdict only confirmed what we already knew. Sylvia's face stayed rigid until the bailiffs rose. As they cuffed her wrists, she turned toward me, lips shaping a message no one else heard. "This isn't over." By dusk, I was home. I placed the ledger, the photos, Alan's report, and the seized notebook into a fireproof box, locked it, and set the key flat on the table. Justice doesn't erase betrayal. It only makes sure the record can't be rewritten. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets scars and relief breathe side by side. The courtroom ended one battle, but scars don't vanish overnight. I'd like to hear from you. What would you tell someone carrying betrayal in their own family? Leave your words below. They strengthen me more than medals. If my story teaches anything, it's that dignity is armor. Guard it carefully, because when others strip away, trust self-respect becomes the shield that keeps you standing upright.